In terms of grammar, formal writing would be likely to be error-free versus non-academic. There is only a free use of grammar, freer uses of grammar, and not always complete sentences. So basically, in academic writing, works or writing are edited for mechanics and grammar as well. For vocabulary in academic writing, subject-specific terms and academic language are used accurately. In non-academic, language tends to be not too specific, and it only uses everyday vocabulary and use of short forms, idioms, and slang to some extent. Another characteristic that is noticeable in academic writing, so some words or contractions are not used. In English, contractions are used in informal settings and are therefore not appropriate for academic texts. Instead of using a contraction, you should write out the words in their entirety. You are not using words such as don't, wasn't, it's, and can't. Also, in academic writing, acronyms and abbreviations are given specific attention. It is important to use acronyms and abbreviations properly in academic writing so that your text is as clear as possible for the reader. You should only use abbreviations when it makes the reading of your text easier. Another rule of thumb is that the abbreviated term should appear at least 3 times in paper. If you use a term more rarely, it might be better to spell it out. Words that are commonly abbreviated, such as professor or prof, and department, such as depth, should be spelled out in academic text. Note, however, that some abbreviations may be used in citations and reference lists. An acronym is a type of abbreviation that is formed by the first letter of each word in a phrase or organization. UN and WHO or WHO are two examples of well-known acronyms. When you introduce the acronym, you should always write out the whole name or phrase followed by the acronym in parentheses. Once you have introduced it, you may use the acronym in the rest of your text. For example, the World Health Organization's WHO has expressed concern over the spread of the virus. The WHO or WHO has therefore. And in order for us to have more idea on formal language, let us go to the Academic Phrase Bank by Manchester University or the University of Manchester. Um, I find this very important for you to know because whenever you are writing, the common problem of Filipinos is that they have limited vocabulary and expressions. If you go to this website, as given in the link in the PowerPoint, you would see the different phrases that you can use. Pay attention to this one here at the left side. You have different expressions or different language functions that you can use, and as you select them, you would be given different options. For example, whenever you are writing and you would like to have a certain level of being careful or being cautious, you would see here different purposes. For example, you would like to show devices that distance the author from a proposition, or being cautious when giving explanations, being cautious when explaining results, advising cautious interpretation of results, being cautious when discussing implications, being cautious when discussing recommendations, being cautious when writing about the future, and devices for overgeneralization. If you click on that, you would be having examples of sentence beginners. For example, you would like to write in a way that you would be distancing yourself as the author from an expression or an idea that you are explaining. You would say, it is thought that, versus saying, I think that. You would be saying, it is believed that, instead of saying, I believe that, and other expressions such as it has been reported that, it is widely held view that, it has commonly been assumed that, according to Smith. So basically, it is up for you to check or browse these during your free time so that you would be having better number of or better ways of um, expressing your idea. So being critical, for example, just to explore it a bit, you have other examples here. There you go. All right. So for example, you would like to show viewing examples. How could you say that? So you could say, for example, a well-known example of academic writing is formal. You could say, for example, an important component of academic writing is being formal. So basically, because I have these academic phrase like my expression becomes more academic and more effective in expressing the idea that I have. Next. The next component of academic writing is analytical. So in academic writing, the complexity of the subject matter is acknowledged through critical analysis. This can be done through asking questions and examining and evaluating evidence. Through critical analysis, we are able to add a new perspective to a subject instead of just rewriting what has already been written. Treating your topic and your material in an analytical manner should seep through in your language. Part of being analytical in your writing is to compare and contrast, evaluate, and consider both sides of an issue. It also means that you explain, give reasons, draw conclusions, make suggestions and recommendations, and support this with evidence. You are not only giving your gut feeling about a certain topic, but basically you're analytically presenting it using the things that are stated here. The third characteristic of academic writing is being objective. Academic writing is based on research and not on the writer's own opinion about a given topic. When you write objectively, you are concerned about facts and not influenced by personal feelings or biases. When presenting an argument to the reader, try to show both sides if you can and avoid making value judgments. At the same time, you will probably have to do an analysis or a discussion and in that manner express an attitude. In order to convey attitude without using, for example, I think, you may use words such as apparently, arguably, ideally, strangely, and unexpectedly. Note that the attitude you are expressing should not be based on personal preferences, but rather on the evidence that you are presenting. To emphasize the meaning of objective, let us set it against the meaning of subjective. Subjective information is anything that is based on personal opinion, judgment, feelings, or point of view. On the other hand, objective information is factual and based on observations and measurements. Using objective language would have different ways to attain it. For example, you can use in the use of personal pronouns, there are some rules. In general, academic texts are impersonal in nature. This means that the main emphasis should be on evidence and arguments and not based on personal opinion and feelings. The use of personal pronouns such as I, we, and you should be avoided as much as possible. You should not be using them. For example, we have several tips here. Use of personal pronouns I, my, our, us, etc. can make the tone of writing too subjective and should be avoided. So how can you do that? Tip number 1 is eliminate personal pronouns. In some cases, these pronouns may simply be eliminated. Compare the following. Instead of saying with personal pronoun I believe modern technology should not replace traditional face-to-face classroom teaching. Instead of saying that, you could have modern technology should not replace traditional face-to-face classroom teaching. What happened is that the expression I believe, along with the personal pronoun, was removed, and instead, the sentence starts immediately with modern technology should not replace traditional face-to-face classroom teaching. So there you go. That is one of the tips. The second sentence above is less personal, more objective, and more academic in tone. It is also less wordy and more confident. If your paper has your name on it, readers will know they are reading your thoughts and opinions. So writing I think, I believe, or in my opinion is not necessary. Simply remove these expressions to make more objective academic sentences. Tip number 2. What you can do is to eliminate pronouns and make minor adjustments. In other cases, minor adjustments may be needed. Compare the following. Let's say the sentence with personal pronoun I would go like, in this paper, I will argue against the proposition that surrogate motherhood is an acceptable practice. Without personal pronoun I, you will have, this paper will argue against the proposition that surrogate motherhood is an acceptable practice. Instead of saying I, you would say this paper. So it's not you as a person, but you would say that the document that you had written is the one that would be doing the argument on the proposition about surrogate motherhood being an acceptable practice. Another variation would be using or would be having a sentence without personal pronoun I, and this time using a passive voice. You would be having it will be argued in this paper below. Open and close parentheses because that is already implied that surrogate motherhood is an unacceptable practice. So we're down to tip number 3 now. This time, in order to make your writing more objective rather than more subjective, you could have or you can use passive voice. The passive voice allows the action rather than the doer to be emphasized, making the sentence less personal. In this case, the doer is obviously the writer of the paper, so it can be de-emphasized or eliminated from the sentence, making the stance less direct and more academic. Academic writers should not refer to what they think, but to what the evidence suggests. In the following, the writer inappropriately refers directly to what she thinks or feels. Inappropriate direct reference to the writer's opinions, feelings, or thoughts. The example shows, from my understanding of the article, capital punishment may not be beneficial because it is inhumane. I feel that societies should provide a better solution to citizens than putting their criminals to death. My essay will demonstrate that capital punishment should be abolished, and I will provide 3 supporting reasons. As you can see, the writer seems to be like referring to the idea as his, making the writer more subjective, making it more of a personal opinion type. So a better, more academic approach would be writing it as such. According to the article, capital punishment may not be beneficial because it is inhumane. It seems that societies should provide a better solution to citizens than putting their criminals to death. Below, it will be demonstrated that capital punishment should be abolished with 3 supporting reasons. Another tip is tip number 4, relate your writing to the evidence, not to your thinking. Writing is much more persuasive when it relates to evidence, which is why the words and phrases in the chart below on the left are seldom used in academic writing compared to those in the chart on the right. You should be avoiding these pronouns or phrases in academic writing, just like what is stated at the beginning of the discussion of the objective writing. Do not be using I think, I feel, I believe, I am convinced that, I am sure that, it is my belief that. Instead, you should be using these words or phrases in academic writing. The literature suggests that. So it's not you. The results indicate that. So what is indicated in the outcome? Considering the results, according to the figures, it is evident that the research indicates or suggests that. So you should be using those expressions. For example, the first one is not self-academic type of writing. The writer wrote, my research suggests strong perceptions of the program as delivering language improvement, friendship, and increased world knowledge, and I believe that it should be promoted more rigorously within the university. I am convinced that universities should consider participation in such schemes as a prerequisite for student exchange programs, rather than relying wholly on criteria such as IELTS scores or other scholastic achievements. One change would be having the research suggests strong perceptions of the program as delivering language improvement, friendship, and increased world knowledge, and the results indicate that it should be promoted more rigorously within the university. It is evident that universities may consider participation in such schemes as a prerequisite for student exchange programs, rather than relying wholly on criteria such as IELTS scores or other scholastic achievements. Tip number 5, do not address the reader as you. It is already implied that you're referring to the reader or you are communicating with the reader. So there is no need for you to be using that if you want to sound academic in your writing, and thus more objective. You would be saying, for example, if you keep on using or writing a sentence with personal pronoun you would have a sentence such as this: if you lose your health, you may not get it back again. Without personal pronoun you would be having, instead of saying you would be changing it with other expressions and other pronouns. You would now have, if people lose their health, they may not get it back again. Instead of saying you would say people. Instead of saying using the second you would be using they to refer to that. Now, there's also a passive voice version. If health is lost, it may not return. So using second person pronouns such as you or your to address the reader is inappropriate and can make an essay read like an informal speech rather than a piece of academic writing. Although the words people, they, there can be used to replace you, your, using passive voice as in the example above is often the best way to avoid using second person as the doer. You, people, or they can be omitted from the sentence and the action can emphasize instead. It may also be less wordy. And remember, another characteristic of formal writing is it being concise. Another characteristic of academic writing is being explicit. Academic writing is explicit in several ways. First and foremost, it means that there is a clear presentation of ideas in the paper. The text should have a well-organized structure and be easy for the reader to follow. One way to accomplish clarity and structure in your text is through the use of signposts. Signposts are words and phrases that you can use in your text in order to guide the reader along. Signposting can be divided into different categories: major signposting and linking words and phrases. For example, you would like to, the thing is here is that whenever you are writing, of course, more often than not, you would be starting with a topic sentence. And then right after the topic sentence, you would be continuing it with support of the topic sentence. And this is where the signpost will be used. For example, if you would like to signpost to introduce something new, you could say one aspect which illustrates ... can be identified as ... So you are now directing the reader that you're going to present something new. Another example is the current debate about illustrates, identifies, or highlights. With regard to, with respect to, initially, secondly, and finally. Another example of signposting is continuing an argument with a related point. So you are now emphasizing another point that's supported. You would say, furthermore, to further understand the role of, in addition, similarly, likewise, what is more, moreover, another issue regarding is, another line of thought on is, that's it. And going into more detail on a point or rephrasing, you would have, in particular, specifically, concentrating on, by focusing on, in more detail, it is possible to be more precise, in other words, to put simply. If you would like to signpost linking to a different point, you could use having established ... it is possible to consider ... is one key issue. Another of equal, then you consider. Another example is similar importance or significances. Then you mention the other point. You could also say also of importance is the issue of, then you mention that. If you would like to reintroduce a topic, meaning refer back to it, you could say as discussed, explained earlier. The earlier discussion on can be developed further here, as stated previously, as noted above. Let's say you would like to signpost now to introduce an opposing alternative view. You could say, however, conversely, in contrast, alternatively, nevertheless, or nonetheless, an alternative perspective is given by who suggests or argues that, despite this conflicts with the view held by. If you would like to show reasoning or summarizing of the point, you would use consequently as a consequence. Accordingly, therefore, it can be concluded that the strength of such an approach is that, for this reason, evidently, clearly, It's clear that, naturally, it is clear that, in short, from this, it can be concluded, inferred, or suggested that the evidence highlights that. Only use such phrase if you are sure that your arguments cannot be challenged. That is for those items with parentheses such as evidently, naturally, and it is clear that. So that ends it. Let's go back to the Google Meet room to discuss the contents of this module.